All right. Well, thank you so much for being on this podcast, Jessica. I'm really excited to ask you all these questions, especially I feel like nowadays more people are going to have the same questions that we're going to talk about. So I want to kind of talk about this, especially when we're heading into the new year. It's already September. I think by the time this podcast episode comes out, probably October. But this could be good for people that are evaluating their life decisions on their careers or anything in general. So
When I talk about finding happiness and satisfaction, it's not this idea that we can like all go live on a deserted island and hang out all day. Like that's not the key to happiness, right? The key to happiness is finding a job and a career where you find joy every day and you have satisfaction and purpose and meaning. And then you're also able to pay the bills and all of that impacts your overall life. So I don't think that the two things are necessarily independent. And I think that this is probably the heart of the question. People think that they go to work, they do their job, and then after work is when they can start to be happy and do the stuff that they like. And what I like to teach people is we can actually find happiness at work. And then that happiness and that satisfaction can spill over to your entire life. So it's not about finding something where, it doesn't pay the bills by any means. That's not what this is about. It's about really kind of tuning in, finding your purpose and living that every day at work.
how do you actually find that balance between maybe it is time for me to do a career change or quit, as opposed to like maybe I should find happiness in what I actually do? Because that was kind of me when I was at Accenture. That was my job before. I'm at Google right now. And I was like, oh, I find the value of doing this. Oh, I can be here for a very long period of time. But also at the same time, I don't know what could be better. And the only way to do that is to like look elsewhere. So how would you make that balance? Because I feel like the older generation's like, I'm going to stay in this job for like 20 plus years until
That's over. Like those days are gone.
and
No
then
one's
now,
doing that.
yes, exactly. And I'm also hearing in another podcast episode I did that like the Gen Zs are, they just kind of want to do their job and then they get out, and or in terms of like work hours, but also in their career as well. So where do you see that falling in?
So your question is at what's sort of the minimum bar that you have to meet when you decide you want to leave your job? Is that the question?
Yeah.
Okay. So I think that when I talk about helping people to find happiness and satisfaction at work, I always say that it boils down to two basic initial questions that you have to ask yourself. And if the first question is this, you have to feel that you're working in an organization where you've achieved your job and any promotion that you will go on to achieve is going to be fair and square. So you're working in an organization where there's equity, where there's fairness, where there's transparency, where people are being rewarded based upon their merit, right? So if you don't have that in your organization, I feel like that's a huge red flag. Now, the second part, I say there's two things that you need from your job in order to have happiness at work. So you need to feel that your success is merited, there's transparency, justice, equity, all of that good stuff. And then the second half of that question is you need to tap into this idea that you have to feel that your job, you are doing something for somebody else that they would not be able to do for themselves, right? So that is a really tangible way to tap into this idea of purpose. I feel like lots of people like to talk about purpose, and it's really like, come on, I'm just doing a 9 to 5. I don't need a purpose. You know what I mean? But I think that when you look at it through that lens, when you say, what am I doing in my job that somebody else would not be able to do, but for me doing what I'm doing? And that boils it down to a really basic kind of question. So, and it can apply to any career. So it can apply if you're a real estate broker, right? You are helping people find their dream homes. Without you, they would not be able to find their dream home. And you have special talent and characteristics in order to understand what your clients need, whatever it is. But that's a great example for how you could tap into purpose. It doesn't matter what you do. You don't have to be solving, you don't have to be doing brain surgery, which is great, but your purpose there is really clear, right? If you're a doctor, your purpose is super clear. Most of us don't have that clear of a purpose. So if you look at it in terms of how am I helping, like for me, I am helping people find more happiness in their work. That's my purpose, and more happiness in their life. And that brings me joy because I know that without me, they wouldn't be able to do that. I'm coming with my own special set of skills that help people find that purpose. So if you can answer those two questions, if your job, if it's merited, if you work in a place where there's transparency and equity and justice, and you can understand what your purpose is, what you're doing to help the life of somebody else, then I say you're in a job where you can start to build happiness, and there are specific things that you could do, but we need to meet that minimum bar. So if you don't meet that minimum bar, I think at that point it's time to kind of think about, what do I want to do and where else do I want to do it?
That's great. And actually moving forward to that, let's say they can't answer those two questions confidently when they're looking for, I don't know, through a job interview, through another company, what are questions they can ask to be able to see that they could at least satisfy those two questions at that new company or job?
So the transparency and the fairness and the equity, right? That you are achieving a job where your hard work is going to be celebrated and promoted, and you're going to be rewarded for that. Those questions I think you can ask in an interview pretty clearly, right? And even if you're not asking those questions directly of the person who's interviewing you, as you move along in the interview process, I think that there are ways that you can kind of get at that from like a side question, right? So it would be, tell me a little bit about your career path. How did you come here? What did you do before? What would you like to be doing next? Is that a viable option for you? What are some other team members' career paths? What do you see as my career path at this organization? I think that kind of starts to hit at those, will I be promoted? Will I be valued? And then the other question around finding your purpose, that is much more of an introspective journey, right? That I don't think that you're going to really start to get from somebody else. That you need to get from yourself. But I would say this, and I think this is a mistake that people make when they're looking for their next job or the next, the new thing. We look at very much like, what am I going to be doing? What is the content of this job? How am I going to be challenged? How is it going to really kind of, I need to be learning every single day. All of those things are hugely, hugely important. But more important than the what of your job is actually the who of your job. So by that, I mean, who are you going to be working with? Because the people that you work with will have a much greater impact on your happiness, satisfaction, joy, whatever it is that you want to call it. There's so many words for it, right? But who you work with and your relationships with your colleagues, that's going to have a much bigger impact. So I would just say, do a little bit of introspection in terms of answering that question of, what am I doing that helps the lives of somebody else? But I would also say, be sure that you're working with people who you enjoy.
That makes a lot of sense. But at the same time, I never thought about the who. I always thought about the why and like
We all always, exactly. We all do that. We all do that 100%. It's like, oh, this job is going to be so challenging and this is such a great organization to work for. And I really think people need to tap into, who are you working with? Who are you working for? People are a huge part of this equation that we kind of just like assume, it'll be fine, but that's really what you need to think about.
Yeah, and also on the interviewer perspective, they're like, would I want to be stuck in an airport with you? But like, we never really think about the other way around. Like, would we want to be stuck with them?
Exactly. And it's also an important part of recruiting, like on the other side. If you're in a position where you're interviewing new people to come into your team, this is something that you really need to think about. Will this person's personality work with all of the other existing personalities on this team? Is this someone whose chemistry is going to add to our trust, our collaboration? I mean, that is something that people talk about fit, but I don't think they really dig in on this idea of like, we need to be friends. Like, we need to like each other.
Great. So one of the questions I wanted to ask is like, what's your no BS approach to feeling stuck? People in the corporate world might feel stuck and even burned out. And I feel like around this time of year is when there are people like, oh, I'm going to my holidays and I have to do work. Like, that's when they start to have this reevaluation about New Year's resolutions. So what are like 5 things people can do about that?
How do they stop feeling stuck? Is that your question? Okay, so the first thing I would say is, and this is the easiest one, and probably like, let's call it low-hanging fruit, even though I hate that terminology, but it works in this situation. So when you are sort of, let's not even call it toxic, but you're just unhappy in your job, the easiest way to start to gain some kind of momentum and some kind of control over those feelings is to lean into this idea of learning new things. Learning new things will give you this newborn kind of inspiration, momentum, appreciation. So if you can either speak to your manager or create learning opportunities for yourself. Maybe that means working on another team, like, going in and working on a particular project where you can kind of start to see how another team in your organization works. Maybe it's leaning into a personal development, going on some kind of training, whatever it is. There's a number of ways that you can start to access more learning, right? So that's the first thing that I would say that you can do to start to get unstuck. The second one is going back to that original question, really tap into this idea about sense of purpose and really start to understand what your purpose is in your work. Now, it might very well be that your purpose in your current job is not the right one, but I think being clear on the question, right? If you are thinking about, you feel stuck, you want out of this job, and you ask yourself the question that I said before, what is it that I am doing for somebody else that they would not otherwise be able to do without me? If you cannot answer that question, start to think about looking for other work where that question starts to become clear to you. That will give you that feeling of getting out of being stuck or unstuck. That's the first one. Sorry, that's the second one. Let's think. I think those are two really good ones to get you started, other than quit your job and start to look for something else, which is unrealistic, right? There are things that you need to do before you can get there. So I think that you need to start to find a sense of happiness in your current position and start to look for something new.
Okay, and actually that actually comes up with a question that my friends have been dealing with themselves, is on purpose. So I think that some people I know, they're like, I'm just going to do my job, pay the bills, and then do whatever I want with that money, like traveling or have as many cats as they could, or go try out all the coffee in the world kind of thing. But when people think about their jobs, I think I had this issue actually of like glamorizing my job, of like putting my identity on the job, that if I am happy in my job, then I am happy. But like vice versa, if something happened at work, then I will take it as an offense, like, oh, this means that I'm not happy if this is not working out. So how do you have that fine balance? Because I can find jobs, like I think actually on my job right now, Google is like an amazing equitable company, but also I find value in the work I'm doing. But I'm also trying to find that distance from that job so I don't fall into that same rut. But at the same time, I do feel happy in my job. So there's like always that little gray area in this particular area.
Yeah, so I think what you're saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, is this idea that your career becomes your identity, right? And we don't necessarily want our career to be our identity, because then we ride the waves of, oh my God, I had a terrible day at work, therefore what is my identity? Or I had a great day at work and I am queen of the universe. So I think it's this idea that so it's a little bit different than purpose. This is kind of the thinking around identity and not wrapping our entire identity in our career. And I think that there's something different. When I talk about finding happiness at work, I am not saying that your career is what defines your happiness. I say it is one part of your happiness. So there's happiness to be derived in every part of your life. And the most important place, so let's get away from finding, making our career our identity and start to generate happiness outside of our work. The most important place that we can do that is through our relationships. That's the most important indicator of overall satisfaction and happiness, is our relationships with our friends and with our family. So in addition to having your career, you must make time for friends. Friends are magic. So you want to be satisfied in your career, you want to give everything that you have, but outside of that, I would say the most important thing to focus on is friends, family, and relationship, and all around cultivating both close relationships and somewhat more casual relationships, joining clubs, kind of examining new interests. All of that is essential to your happiness and your identity, to be frank.
That's great. I think like that's where I had my issues before. It was like, okay, career, because I spend majority of my day anyways on my job, I should at least be happy and like it, what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And then at the same time, the people that are very career focused could also start to have suffering relationships for that exact reason.
No, exactly right. Did you feel that you were like putting all of the eggs let's say all of your eggs were going in your career basket? Is that what you found?
Ironically, I think I had a really strict 9 to 5 schedule, and thankfully my job allowed me to do that, which is unheard of in consulting, but I was able to do that.
Yeah, that's amazing.
But then after that, I was like, okay, I'm going to cut shut off my professional side, focus on my personal side. But then if something in professional side, I'm usually like, okay, if everything goes well, then I'm happy. But if not, then it starts to bother me in my personal life.
Yeah.
Then
No, I understand.
yeah.
It's that ability, and as women, we're actually, and I feel like this is just a very anecdotal observation. This is not a scientific observation, but as women, we're not that good at compartmentalizing things. I feel like men are a lot more successful at, they had a bad day and they kind of like store it in one part of their brain and they're able to go on and do something else. Whereas I'm exactly the same as you. It tends to spill over and kind of pollute the entire room, you know? So that's something that I work on a lot, actually, is around this idea that you need to isolate those anxieties and worries to one spot so that you can kind of keep the train moving.
Yeah. So I'm also kind of curious about what's your definition of toxic happiness and what is it and how do you deal with it, or others if you have recommendations.
Yeah, so this idea, I mean, I think that toxic positivity is absolutely something that is a very real phenomena, right? You can go on LinkedIn or Facebook or whatever, or Instagram, whatever it is, TikTok, and all of these kind of like, you know, people are spewing these kind of empty platitudes, is what I like to say. So I am very much against anything having to do with toxic positivity. And it's this notion that if we focus too much on being positive, you actually wind up being more unhappy, right? So if you focus too much on this idea of I'm searching out happiness, that's not the way that you start to build sustainable and lasting happiness. When I'm talking about happiness, there are specific habits and tools and tactics that you need to do. For example, you need to cultivate friendships, right? That is much more around building happiness rather than like going out and seeking happiness. That's actually going to undermine exactly what you're trying to do. So I stay away from any kind of platitude, empty, you know, any of that is opposite of everything that I say to do. My work is much more grounded in very tangible tools and tactics. And this idea that you're hunting out happiness will only lead to unhappiness.
Okay, and then starting off with the people that are early in their careers, what boundaries should they make and what pitfalls should they avoid?
So I think the first one is exactly what we were just talking about before. So I think it's this idea that you wrap your entire identity into your career. I don't think that that's a very fruitful kind of adventure, right? And I think this idea that we've been told, you know, if you do what you love, you'll never work a day in your life. I think that that's a silly saying. I think it has no meaning. And I think that we're doing people a disservice by saying things like that. So I don't think, the first thing I would say is you do not want to wrap your entire identity in your career. You want to enjoy your career. You want to work with people that you like. You want to be challenged. You want to have learning opportunities, but you need to also develop all of that other stuff. So all of the interests, the learning opportunities, the friendships, that would be my number one watch out for new career people.
And vice versa. Do you have any differing advice for those that are in mid-career, or would it be the same pretty much?
Well, I would say mid-career. I think that a lot of people kind of get saddled with this idea that it's too late for them. And even in mid-career, I think that people get saddled. Well, I've already chosen this and this is what I have to do. And I'm on this path. Even if you're 30 years old, you feel like it's too late to switch, right? So I'm not talking about people who first of all, I believe it's never too late. Like I am a big believer in it is never too late, not at any point, anywhere, at any moment. In fact, it's always too early is what you usually find. So I would say don't get stuck on this like idea that it's too late to switch, that you've sunken in all this time. You know, there's that whole idea of sunk costs in economics, right? That you've already committed to buying the ticket to watch the movie, even though you hate the movie, you're going to sit there and watch it because you paid $20 to see the movie. When the truth of the matter is you should leave and enjoy those 2 hours rather than being tortured, right? So it is never too late to switch, to change, to shift gears and look at things differently and do something new. That would be my advice for mid-career people.